Today's Russian attack on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities was an obvious response by Russian President Putin to the ultimatum issued to him by American President Donald Trump. As is known, Trump called on Putin to reach a peace agreement within 50 days, which could at least lead to a ceasefire on the Russian-Ukrainian front. And what troubled the American president even more, something he has repeatedly admitted both during his public appearances and at his recent meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Yes, these are the massive bombardments of peaceful residential neighborhoods by Russian aviation, as well as strikes with missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles. And this, as we understand it, was one of Donald Trump's most important goals when he issued his ultimatum to Putin to stop the killing of people. And as we can see, Putin is still ignoring this ultimatum precisely because aerial terror intimidating the citizens of our country and trying to convince them of the necessity and inevitability of capitulation to Russia are important objectives for the Russian president and all those who carry out his criminal orders. We also see how Russia treats the idea of continuing negotiations with Ukraine. As is known, these negotiations were merely simulated by Putin solely to prevent the adoption of the ultimatum that was presented to him by European leaders in coordination with Donald Trump back on May 10th of this year. According to that ultimatum, by May 12th, Russia was to cease fire on the Russian-Ukrainian front, otherwise coordinated sanctions from the United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom would be imposed. As is known, instead of responding to this ultimatum, Putin proposed to resume the so-called negotiation process in Istanbul. However, during the two rounds of this so-called negotiation process, the only agreements reached were on humanitarian issues, which the Kremlin tried to use to mask its lack of intention to cease fire or to negotiate any real outcome for peace in Ukraine. Now, when it has become clear that the negotiation process staged by Putin has not led to the desired results, and that Trump is threatening the Russian president with sanctions not only against him personally, but also against his economic partners, it is obvious that Moscow sees no need to continue negotiations with the Ukrainian delegation. At the very least, Putin's press secretary Peskov today, responding to the proposal by Ukraine's Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov, to hold negotiations between the Russian and Ukrainian delegations in the coming days, emphasized that it is now necessary, first and foremost, to discuss the text of the memorandums provided by the Russian and Ukrainian sides. The press secretary of the President of the Russian Federation reminded that the texts of these memorandums are diametrically opposed and made it clear that until they are discussed, there is essentially no point in holding negotiations at all. Although it has always seemed to me that negotiations are precisely needed so that delegations can discuss the text of memorandums or other proposals which at the beginning of the consultation process are diametrically opposed. But in the Kremlin, as we understand, they have a different opinion. In Moscow, they would like the Ukrainian delegation to come to the negotiations solely to agree to the text of the memorandum proposed by Moscow about Ukraine's capitulation and the transformation of our country into a puppet entity in Putin's pocket. And for that, they need to continue the aerial terror against Ukrainian cities and towns. For that, they need to intimidate Ukrainians. For that, they need to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure facilities so as not to give the Ukrainian armed forces the opportunity to repel the frenzied attacks of Russian criminals in military uniforms. After all, only in a fairy tale could these people be called any kind of real armed forces. They are, were, and will remain punishers because it is precisely punishers who are trained in Russian military academies and the academies of the Federal Security Service. It is precisely the fight against the civilian population that has been, is, and will remain the purpose of the Russian army's existence throughout almost its entire inglorious history. Thus, it can be said with absolute certainty that Putin will not respond positively to Donald Trump's proposals for as long as he is allowed to. And he will hope that in 50 days, the American president will not impose any sanctions against the Russian Federation and its partners. And if sanctions are imposed, there will be partners, first and foremost, the People's Republic of China, who will continue to buy Russian oil and thus give Putin the opportunity to continue his war against Ukraine for as long as the Russian leader deems necessary. It cannot be said that the Americans do not understand this. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent emphasized that the United States now intends to move in its negotiations with China to topics such as the purchase by the People's Republic of China of sanctioned Iranian and sanctioned Russian oil. Washington fully understands that it is precisely these Chinese purchases are now allowing Iran to continue developing its nuclear weapons and to hope once again to destabilize the Middle East, while allowing Russia to continue the Russian-Ukrainian war and prepare for new large-scale wars in the post-Soviet space and on the European continent. Wars that could shape the face of the 21st century, and how simple it is. If Beijing stops being the economic sponsor of Russia, Moscow, Kremlin, Putin's madness, the wars could end immediately. Iran and Russia will have no opportunities, no poisonous fangs to continue their destabilizing, inhumane activities for the sake of which the Ayatollah's regime exists in the Islamic Republic and Putin's regime exists in Moscow. But another important question arises: to what level of confrontation with China is Washington prepared to go in order to force the leadership of the Communist Party of this authoritarian country to stop further sponsoring terrorist regimes and their intentions to continue wars and kill women and children? I hope that we will learn about these intentions of the United States at least sooner than the 50 days that Donald Trump gave Vladimir Putin to continue killing Ukrainian civilians and attacking peaceful Ukrainian cities. Thank you, friends. Stay tuned to this channel. Subscribe to it. Follow me on social media, Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and Donatella channels supporting these resources. Use the sponsorship feature on YouTube. Wishing you victory and peace. Good luck!